Hello everyone, this is Professor Hill, and this is a short video for our class Introduction to Ethics Philosophy 2306. And today is the beginning of week 13. It's Tuesday, April the 17th, 2018. This is the spring online version of our class for the spring 2018 semester. And as I mentioned yesterday in my video, we're going to try to do a case study this week that responds to unfolding, developing events. Always a little tricky, but like I said, it was a request from some of the students in the class, and I thought, this is a good idea. We're talking about international humanitarian law, IHL, the rules of armed conflict, and we were kind of overtaken by events, as they say, with the United States, France, and the United Kingdom all shooting missiles into Syria. And this raising some profound questions about, is the use of force, is this armed combat moral? Is it justified? Is it ethical? Does it comply with American law? Does it comply with international law? Are we in violation of our treaty obligations, which of course is also incorporated into national law? So what we're going to look at is this particular question of the missile attack which happened over the weekend. This was the 13th, 14th. So, had a chance to do a little brief introduction yesterday. Today, I'll outline more exactly the question that I want us to face, because we need to focus this down. But one of the issues that I want us to deal with this week is something we talked about at Philosophy Club today. And by the way, every Tuesday at noon, we eat pizza and talk philosophy on campus in the Sutton Learning Center, room 219. You're always welcome to drop by and join the conversation. We have a philosophy club made up of students. They also put on the Ethics Bowl every year, if you're interested in that. We compete in the Texas Regional Ethics Bowl. And today, the conversation was, not surprisingly perhaps, dominated by concern about the military action in Syria. And the question today was put simply by Professor Fuller, who said, are we at war or not? And this led into a really interesting conversation about the definition of war. When has the United States formally declared war? Interestingly enough, it's only 4 times. There's our trivia question for today. I'll answer it tomorrow, and or you can Google it. But the point is, if we're launching missiles into Syria, blowing up buildings, factories, infrastructure, killing people, how is that not war? And if it's not war, what is it? And the history of war and the definition of war in the United States has changed a lot since Vietnam and the growth of what they call the imperial presidency and the concentration of power in the executive branch, which is one of the things our founding fathers tried to avoid with a balance of checks that we can put on each of the individual branches of government, one against the other. But the fact of the matter is, we do live now in a time where the president has extraordinary power. And since the Vietnam War, especially with something developed called the War Powers Act, Congress had tried to develop a check on the power of the presidency. They want notification, if not explicit permission, ahead of time. They want regular reports. I'll put a link to the details of the War Powers Act and how that piece of domestic American law applies to what happened over the weekend. I'll also, continue the theme of IHL, track down some of the relevant bits of that in terms of the definition. And again, this is going to be one of the hardest things here, about how do you characterize the armed combat happening in Syria. It's not one state against another. It's not 2 countries fighting. It's a civil war. But now the civil war has become internationalized, with the Americans on one side and the Russians on the other. But even that is not a completely accurate description, because you got to remember, the Russians are there helping bolster the regime, right? The government against the rebels. But we're not on the side of the rebels. We're in Syria, but we're not there involving ourselves in the civil war officially. We're there fighting terrorists. We say that we're in Syria to fight ISIS. And so we're there, but we're not participating in the civil war. Yeah, you can see how this ends up with all kinds of conflicts of interest, and the need for what we exercised over the weekend, which is a deconfliction process. It's, listen, we're going to launch these raids, but we need to tell Russia, who's in Syria, look, we're not attacking you. You guys need to get out of the way. The missiles are coming, which is part of this deconfliction protocol we have developed. And yet, of course, the Russians then also turn around, because they're there helping their allies, the government. They tell them. So that we're essentially informing the Syrians ahead of time by telling the Russians who tell the Syrians that the attack is coming. Now again, this starts to sound a little crazy, but you have to remember, it also has to do with what's proportional in terms of response. That's going to be one of the key concepts in terms of the United States' response to this allegation of chemical weapons. Now, I mentioned yesterday, and I put up some things in that special announcement about whether or not it's legal according to IHL. That's a shaky argument to make. But I can tell you, if you're worried about the moral side of the argument, we're there to stop these chemical attacks by the government on the people. We can do it with a proportionate attack, meaning we're going to focus in on the chemical weapons, the chemical supply, the chain of command and control. We're going to go after the actual facilities that make the chemical weapons. This begins to address some of the concerns about international law, but also